Imagine this. It's one of the worst snowstorms in decades. The streets are empty. The subways are shutting down. And in the cold, fluorescent lights of an abandoned station, a billionaire is about to make a discovery that will change 5 lives forever. 3 little girls. Alone. Huddled together on a bench. No parents in sight. Most people would walk away. Call the authorities maybe. But Jack Morrison didn't walk away. And what happened next? The decision he made in that moment would lead to a chain of events so incredible, so heartbreaking, and ultimately so beautiful, that it will challenge everything you think you know about compassion, second chances, and what it really means to help someone. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a true story about poverty, desperation, and the impossible choices a mother had to make. It's about 3 innocent children caught in circumstances beyond their control. And it's about a man who had everything, except the one thing these girls needed most. Before we dive into this incredible story, I want to be real with you for a second. This video took over 20 hours to research, write, edit, and produce. If you appreciate the effort that goes into bringing these stories to life, hitting that subscribe button really helps us continue creating content like this. It's free for you, but it means the world to us. Now let's get into it. Because what started on that frozen subway platform would become something none of them could have ever predicted. Jack Morrison wasn't supposed to be on the subway that night. As the founder and CEO of Morrison Technologies, a man whose name appeared regularly in Forbes and Wall Street Journal, he typically traveled by private car. But the snowstorm had made the roads impassable. Even wealth couldn't beat nature. So there he was in his $1,000 coat, waiting on a near-empty platform as the city shut down around him. The fluorescent lights flickered. The wind howled through the tunnels. And that's when he saw them. 3 girls. The oldest couldn't have been more than 8. The youngest maybe 4. They were sitting on a metal bench, pressed together like they were trying to become one person. The oldest had her arms wrapped around the 2 younger ones. Their clothes were worn but clean. Their faces were tear-streaked but silent. Jack looked around. No adults. No parents. Nothing. He approached slowly. "Hey there," he said, crouching down to their level. "Where are your parents?" The oldest girl, her name was Emily, he would later learn, looked at him with eyes far too old for her face. "Mommy said to wait here. She said she'd be back soon." "How long ago was that?" Emily glanced at the clock on the wall. "A long time." Jack felt something twist in his chest. The station was closing. The last trains were running. And it was getting colder by the minute. He pulled out his phone to call the police, but then he hesitated. The girls were scared. They were cold. And if he called the authorities now, they'd be taken to emergency services, separated, processed through a system that was already overwhelmed. He thought about his own daughter, gone now for 5 years after the accident. He thought about what he would have wanted someone to do for her. "All right," he said. "How about you girls come with me until we can find your mom? I have a warm place where you can wait safely." Olivia, the middle sister, shook her head. "Mommy said not to go with strangers." "Your mom is very smart," Jack said. "But she also wouldn't want you to freeze here. What if we call someone together? Is there anyone you can call?" Emily pulled out a flip phone, the kind that barely existed anymore, from her pocket. The screen was cracked. She tried to turn it on. Dead battery. Jack made a decision. "My name is Jack Morrison. I'm going to help you find your mom, okay? But first, we need to get you somewhere warm." It took another 10 minutes of gentle persuasion, but eventually they agreed. Jack called his driver, who managed to navigate the treacherous streets to pick them up. The girls sat in the back of the Mercedes, eyes wide, taking in the leather seats and heated interior like it was a spaceship. At his mansion in Greenwich, the staff quickly prepared rooms. The girls were given hot chocolate and soup. They took warm baths. Jack's housekeeper, Mrs. Chin, found some of his daughter's old clothes that had been stored away. And then came the calls. Jack used every resource at his disposal: private investigators, police contacts, hospital networks. By midnight he had an answer. But it wasn't the answer anyone wanted. Laura Hayes, single mother. Last known address: an apartment building in the Bronx currently facing eviction proceedings. And there was more. She'd been caught in a building collapse during the storm. She was at Mount Sinai Hospital. Unconscious. Critical condition. Jack sat in his study looking at the report on his screen. This woman, this mother, had left her children in a subway station. Not because she didn't love them, but because she was desperate. She'd been searching for work, trying to find any way to keep them from losing their home. And then disaster struck. The girls were asleep now, safe in warm beds. But their mother was fighting for her life across the city. And Jack Morrison, a man who'd spent his entire life building an empire, realized he was facing a crisis that money alone couldn't solve. What would you do if you found yourself in Jack's position? Would you get involved or call the authorities? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious to see what you think. The next morning, Jack broke the news to the girls as gently as he could. Emily, Olivia, and Ava listened with the kind of stoic silence that only children who've experienced too much hardship can manage. They didn't cry. They didn't scream. They just nodded and asked when they could see their mother. Soon, Jack promised. As soon as the doctors say it's okay. But soon turned into days. Then a week. Laura remained unconscious, her body healing from multiple injuries, broken ribs, a fractured leg, internal bleeding. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but there were no guarantees. During this time, Jack learned more about Laura Hayes than any dossier could tell him. He learned it from her daughters. Emily, at 8 years old, had been helping her mother pay bills. She knew how to count change, how to stretch $1, how to make ramen noodles last for 3 days. Olivia, 6, had learned to be invisible at school so teachers wouldn't notice when she wore the same clothes multiple days in a row. And Ava, 4 years old, still believed in fairy tales, because her mother had read them to her every night, even when there was barely enough money for food. Jack hired tutors. He made sure the girls ate properly. He watched as they slowly began to trust that this safety might last. Mrs. Chin became their surrogate grandmother, teaching them to bake cookies and telling them stories about her own childhood. But Jack also did something else. He visited Laura every single day. He sat beside her hospital bed, this stranger he'd never met, and he talked. He told her about her daughters. How brave they were. How much they loved her. How they asked about her constantly. He held her hand and made promises he wasn't sure he could keep, that everything would be okay, that they'd find a way forward, that she wasn't alone anymore. And then, on the 17th day, Laura woke up. The first word she said was, "Girls?" Jack was there. "They're safe. They're at my home. They're waiting for you." Laura tried to sit up, panic flooding her eyes. "I need to see them. I need." "They're okay," Jack said firmly but gently. "Laura, your daughters are healthy and safe. But right now, you need to focus on getting better." Over the next few days, as Laura's condition stabilized, the whole story came out. And it was even worse than Jack had imagined. Laura had been working 3 jobs. Cleaning offices at night, waitressing during the day, and doing freelance data entry whenever she could find it. But it still wasn't enough. The landlord was threatening eviction. She'd applied for assistance, but there was a waiting list. Always a waiting list. The day of the snowstorm, she'd had an interview for a better-paying job across town. It was her last hope. She'd left the girls in the subway because she thought she'd only be gone an hour. The station was warm and dry, and Emily was responsible. It was supposed to be temporary. But then the building collapsed, and temporary became a nightmare. "I'm the worst mother in the world," Laura whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I left my babies. I abandoned them." "You did what you thought you had to do to save them," Jack said. "But I was going to give them up," Laura confessed, her voice breaking. "Before the storm, I'd contacted an adoption agency. I thought if I couldn't provide for them, maybe someone else could. Maybe they'd have a better life without me." There it was. The secret that had been eating her alive. The impossible decision that no parent should ever have to make. "Do they know?" Jack asked. "No. God, no. How could I tell them? How could I look them in the eye and say I considered giving them away?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You didn't give them away. You're still here. You're still fighting. That's what matters." "But what happens now?" Laura asked. "I lost my apartment. I lost my jobs. I can't take care of them. Maybe they're better off." "Stop," Jack said. "Just stop. Laura, your daughters don't need a perfect mother. They need their mother. The woman who read them fairy tales when you couldn't afford to eat. The woman who taught them to be strong and kind despite everything you've been through." Laura looked at him, this stranger who'd somehow become the most important person in her life, and asked, "Why are you doing this?" Jack thought about his own daughter. About the 5 years he'd spent building companies and making money, thinking somehow that success would fill the hole she'd left behind. It never had. "Because someone should have been there for my family when we needed it," he said quietly. "Because this shouldn't happen to anyone. And because your daughters deserve a fighting chance." That night, Jack made another decision. One that would change everything. "Here's something I keep thinking about. Do you believe Laura made the right choice considering her situation? Was there another option she could have taken?" Let me know your thoughts below because this is where it gets complicated. The reunion happened 2 weeks after Laura woke up. By then, she could walk with crutches and the doctors had cleared her for a brief visit. Jack arranged for it to happen at his home rather than the hospital. He wanted the girls to see their mother somewhere warm and safe. When Laura's car pulled up to the mansion, Emily, Olivia, and Ava were waiting at the door with Mrs. Chen. The moment they saw their mother step out, even with crutches, even with visible injuries, they ran to her. Jack had seen many things in his life. He'd closed billion-dollar deals. He'd stood on stages in front of thousands. But watching those 3 girls embrace their mother, watching Laura hold them as if she'd never let go, tears streaming down all their faces, that was the most powerful moment he'd ever witnessed. "Mommy, we knew you'd come back," Ava said, her small arms wrapped around Laura's waist. Laura looked at Jack over her daughters' heads, mouthing the words, "Thank you." But Jack knew thanks weren't enough. This family needed more than rescue. They needed a future. Over the following months, Jack implemented a plan. He hired the best physical therapists for Laura. He arranged for therapy, not just for her injuries but for the trauma of everything she'd experienced. He connected her with social workers and legal advocates to navigate the system she'd been drowning in. But more importantly, he offered her something else: purpose. "I want to start a foundation," Jack told Laura one afternoon as she recovered in the guest house he'd converted into a home for her and the girls. "A foundation dedicated to helping families in crisis. Families like yours. And I want you to help me run it." Laura stared at him. "Me? Jack, I don't have any qualifications. I barely finished high school." "You have the most important qualification," Jack said. "You've lived it. You know what these families need because you've been there. You understand the system's failures because you've experienced them. That's worth more than any degree." Laura was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know if I can do this." "Neither do I," Jack admitted. "But we're going to try anyway." The Morrison Family Crisis Foundation officially launched 6 months later. But the real work had started long before that. Jack and Laura traveled to community centers, homeless shelters, and social service agencies. They talked to families on the edge, single parents working multiple jobs, parents struggling with medical debt, families one emergency away from losing everything. What they discovered was staggering. There were thousands of Lauras out there. Hundreds of thousands. Good parents who loved their children but couldn't overcome the systemic barriers keeping them trapped in poverty. People who fell through the cracks of a safety net that had too many holes. The foundation focused on 3 core areas: emergency financial assistance for families facing eviction or utility shutoffs, job training and placement programs, and mental health support for both parents and children. But they also did something unconventional. They hired people who'd been through the system to help run it. Laura became the face of the foundation. She shared her story publicly, including the part about considering adoption. It was terrifying, but she did it because she wanted other parents to know they weren't alone in their darkest thoughts. "I thought giving up my children was the ultimate act of love," Laura said at the foundation's launch event. "But what I learned is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is accept help. To let people see your struggle and say, 'Yes, I need support.'" The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Volunteers signed up. Other organizations reached out for partnerships. But the most important responses came from families who contacted the foundation, families who needed help and were finally finding it. Emily, Olivia, and Ava thrived during this time. They attended a good school that Jack helped arrange scholarships for. They made friends. They learned that life could be stable, that adults could be dependable, that tomorrow didn't have to be scary. But they never forgot where they came from. Emily, now 9, volunteered at foundation events, helping to organize donated clothes for other children. Olivia created artwork for fundraisers. And Ava, with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster, told everyone she met about our foundation that helps families. The relationship between Laura's family and Jack evolved too. It wasn't quite family in the traditional sense, but it was something deeper than friendship. Jack became Uncle Jack to the girls. He attended their school plays and parent-teacher conferences. He taught Emily to code and took Olivia to art museums and played Tea Party with Ava. For Jack, who'd spent 5 years in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum, the sound of children's laughter was medicine he didn't know he needed. He found himself smiling again, looking forward to weekends, feeling like life had purpose beyond the next quarter's earnings. Laura, meanwhile, discovered strengths she never knew she had. She was a natural advocate, fierce and compassionate in equal measure. She understood policy implications because she'd lived the consequences. When she spoke at city council meetings or testified before state committees, legislators listened. Because she didn't speak in statistics, she spoke in stories. Real stories. Human stories. 1 year after that snowstorm, the foundation held its first anniversary celebration. They'd helped 847 families avoid eviction. They'd placed 312 parents in better-paying jobs. They'd provided therapy to 1,203 people. The numbers were impressive, but they didn't tell the whole story. The whole story was in the faces of families who attended the celebration. Parents who could afford to keep their children fed. Children who could focus on school instead of survival. People who'd been given what Laura had been given, a second chance. At the event, Jack gave a speech. But midway through, he stopped and called Laura up to the stage. "This isn't my foundation," he said. "This is ours. And really, it belongs to every family we've had the privilege to serve." "Laura, you want to say something?" Laura stepped up to the microphone. Emily, Olivia, and Ava watched from the front row, beaming with pride. Laura looked at her daughters, then at Jack, then at the hundreds of people gathered. "A year ago, I was at the lowest point of my life," she began. "I thought I had failed my children. I thought the only choice I had left was to give them up. But then something happened that I never expected. Someone saw us. Really saw us. Not as a problem to be solved, but as people who mattered. And that made all the difference." She paused, composing herself. "If you take nothing else from tonight, take this. We all have the power to see people. To really see them. And sometimes that's where miracles begin." The room erupted in applause. That if you had Jack's resources, what cause would you create a foundation for? What issue hits closest to home for you? Share in the comments. Your answer might inspire someone else. 2 years after that night in the subway, the Morrison Family Crisis Foundation had become a model for how private philanthropy could address systemic poverty. Other billionaires had taken notice, not just writing checks but getting involved. The foundation had expanded to 5 cities with plans for 10 more. But the real measure of success wasn't in the expansion. It was in the details. The small moments that added up to transformed lives. Like the morning Laura got her GED with Jack and her daughters cheering in the audience. Or when Emily won the school science fair with a project about sustainable housing for low-income families. Or when Olivia's artwork was featured in a gallery, with proceeds going to the foundation. Or when Ava started kindergarten at a school where she didn't have to hide that she'd once been homeless. Laura eventually moved into her own apartment, a real one she could afford on her salary as the foundation's director of family services. But she and the girls still spent weekends at Jack's house. They'd become an unconventional family, bound not by blood but by something stronger, shared experience and genuine love. Jack's companies continued to thrive, but they were no longer his only legacy. When reporters asked him about his greatest achievement, he no longer talked about technology or profits. He talked about a foundation born from a snowstorm and 3 little girls who'd reminded him what actually mattered. The foundation developed innovative programs that other organizations began copying. They created a rapid response team that could help families within 48 hours of an emergency. They partnered with employers to offer flexible scheduling for single parents. They lobbied for policy changes at the state level. They became a voice for the voiceless. But perhaps most importantly, they gave people hope. The kind of hope that comes from knowing you're not alone. That someone believes in you. That your circumstances don't define your worth. Laura never forgot what rock bottom felt like. She never forgot standing on that subway platform, making an impossible choice. She never forgot the guilt that came with considering adoption, or the shame of feeling like a failure. And she used those memories to fuel her work, to connect with families who were where she'd once been. "I tell them what someone once told me," Laura said in an interview. "Your children don't need a perfect parent. They need you. And it's okay to need help. It's okay to struggle. What's not okay is a society that makes struggling parents feel like they have to choose between their dignity and their children's well-being." On the 3-year anniversary of that snowstorm, a date that had become a sort of unofficial holiday for their family, Jack, Laura, Emily, Olivia, and Ava gathered at the mansion for dinner. Mrs. Chin had prepared a feast. There was laughter and storytelling and the kind of comfort that only comes from people who've been through hell together and come out the other side. As they sat around the table, Ava asked a question that only a 7-year-old would ask. "Uncle Jack, what if you hadn't been at the subway that day? What if someone else found us?" Jack looked at Laura, who looked at her daughters. The question hung in the air. "I don't know," Jack said honestly. "But I'm grateful every day that I was there. Because finding you 3, finding all of you, saved me just as much as I hope I helped save you." Emily, now 11 and wise beyond her years, said, "Maybe that's how it works. Maybe we all save each other. And in that moment, in that room full of warmth and hope and second chances, that felt like the truest thing any of them had ever heard. This story isn't just about one family or one billionaire's generosity. It's about the choice we all face every single day. Do we see people or do we look away? Jack Morrison could have walked past those girls. He could have called the authorities and moved on with his life. And no one would have blamed him. But he didn't. He chose to see them. To really see them. And that choice rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. Laura could have given up. She could have believed the voice in her head that said she wasn't enough, that her children deserved better, that she'd failed. But she didn't. She accepted help. She let herself be seen. And in doing so, she became a light for countless other families struggling in the darkness. The Morrison Family Crisis Foundation is real, by the way. It's still operating. Still changing lives. Still proving that compassion paired with action can move mountains. This story really stayed with me, and I hope it resonated with you too. What was the moment that hit you hardest? Was it Laura's confession? Jack's decision? The girl's resilience? Let me know in the comments. And if you made it this far, you're part of the small percentage who actually watches until the end. Thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. These are the stories that remind us of our shared humanity, and I'll keep telling them as long as you keep listening. I'll see you in the next one.